Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome to another macro photography tutorial. Today we're going to be doing some macro astrophotography. We're going to be using marbles to create planets. So let's get started and I'll see you in just a sec. Back when the Adaptalux Studio was on Kickstarter and it was still a prototype, Sam took some really interesting photos of marbles. And I wanted to get my marble collection out and have another go at that. As it turns out, I've lost my marbles. I couldn't resist making that joke, but it is true, we did have to go out and buy some new marbles. The ones that we got, though, are really interesting. They resemble the planets of the solar system. So we've got the sun, I've got a little bag full of planets here, and the Earth actually has continents printed on it, which I thought was really cool. I think these are going to create some really interesting shots when we light them properly. I wonder if we can't make them look a little bit more realistic, a little bit less like a collection of random marbles, and a little bit more like the actual planets. So I'm going to get my lighting out and see what we can do. Our first shot is going to be of the sun. I'm shooting this one first because it's going to be different to how we need to shoot the rest of our marbles to make them look realistic. Obviously, the sun is the only body in our solar system that actually creates light. So we're going to need this to be shot a little bit differently to the rest. This marble is our sun marble, and you'll see that it's translucent, clear white with these orange little specks and grains embedded in the surface, which gives it a really uneven texture. What I need to do though is make it look like the light is actually emanating, being created by the sun itself. And the way that I'm going to do that is by using our Adaptalux Studio, which I've already got set up here with an amber lighting arm down here and then a red lighting arm on the top. And what I'm going to do is just place this marble right on the top of this amber lighting arm, and it's going to balance there really nicely, and you'll see that that amber light is refracting around inside the marble and creating this effect of the marble itself making the light. If you look down from the top, it's even more apparent because the light is shining up through the marble towards the lens. So this is how I'm going to take this initial shot of the sun. I'm going to be looking down on the marble from the top. The red lighting arm is providing some important red light here. Without that external light, the specks actually create shadows, which if you look at an actual image of our sun, it's quite realistic, because when you expose for an image of the sun, you'll see that some areas of the surface are actually a lot darker. You get these sunspots which look almost black on an image. Of course, they're still creating a lot of light. It's just the difference between the exposure of the really bright areas and the not so bright areas. So those speckles on this marble really help to recreate that. To get a little bit more colour though, I've added this red light just to highlight those darker areas and have them not be just complete darkness. I'm really happy with the shots that we just got of our sun marble, simply because this marble doesn't actually look too much like the sun, but the use of those amber and red lighting arms really made the difference, and it made it actually look quite a lot like the shots that you see of our own star. That's not a technique that we're going to be able to use for the rest of our planets though. While some of the other marbles do have a passing resemblance to the planets they're supposed to represent, some of them are not so great. We've got Mercury and Jupiter are essentially just ball bearings, which are not going to look very interesting up close, and we're probably not going to be able to get those to look too much like their actual planets. Same for something like Venus. We've got a translucent planet here, and if you know anything about planets, you'll probably know that they're not translucent, you can't see through them. The light will reflect off only one side, and you get that telltale sort of half crescent, or that's why the moon looks the way that it does, because the light obviously can't pass through it, but our moon, the light can pass through it. So we're going to have to take some creative license with that, as well as some of our other planets as well, like Saturn here is essentially just, well, the rings are just a rubber washer, which although great for display purposes and having a cool set of marbles, it's not going to look great up close. The planet, however, does look quite cool. It's almost an opaque version of the sun marble with these little grains embedded in the surface. So I'm going to take some creative license and go exploring some of these planets in more of a loose fashion. I'm not going to try and make them look exactly like their actual representative planets in our solar system. I'm going to maybe take more of a movie or a graphic novel approach to planet creation, and see if we can't come out with some really cool shots of these marbles looking a little bit like planets. One technique I am going to continue to use is placing our marbles onto the ends of lighting arms. I found this worked really well to light the inside of our sun, but I'm going to turn off the light and just continue to balance these on the ends of the lighting arms. The marbles come with these little washers that you can use for displaying them, and they won't roll around, but that leaves them a little bit too close down to the surface of my coffee table here. We're getting a lot of reflections from the glass, we're getting a lot of things in the background, and it's not great for moving around your subject either. So placing the marbles up on the lighting arms like this means that you can move around a lot easier. I don't want that light on though, so I'm just going to hit this top button. The light will start to flash, and then I can reduce it just by holding the minus button, and it'll flash again when it's at 0. If I just leave that for a couple of seconds, that is going to turn off altogether, and then I can quite safely place my planet on its own little stand and bring in more lighting arms around the sides to then light my subject. I've been getting some really good shots of our marbles. We've got some shots of the sun and all of the individual planets, but what we need to do is put them into the same space. Now, I'm not usually one for a lot of Photoshop and editing in my images. Usually I like to get everything straight out of the camera if possible. In this case though, I think we're going to need to do a little bit of compositing, simply because the scales of these marbles are completely wrong. The sun is actually not that much bigger than some of the planets, and in real life stars are absolutely massive, really huge compared to the planets that orbit them. So I'm going to need to drop some of these planets into the right positions on our shots of the sun. So I'm going to jump over to Photoshop and show you really quickly how to do that. After importing your images, the first thing that you need to do is to select a starting point. So I quite like this image of our star, and I have it open in Photoshop here, but I also have some alternatives as well. So I made a binary system here with a smaller marble on a lower down lighting arm, and then the sun marble up on a blue lighting arm, which made a blue giant, which I thought was really quite interesting. So you don't have to do it using compositing. There is ways to do it here. Obviously you'd have to remove these lighting arms, but that is a possibility. So we've got our star here, and I want to add a planet here. I'm going to do this as simply and as quickly as possible, just so you can get the idea of what we're doing. So I have a planet ready here, and I'm just going to drag this over onto our main scene, and I'm going to orient it so that the shadow on the marble is facing towards the sun, as it would be if it were an actual planet. I'm pretty happy with that positioning there, so I'm going to hit OK. The next thing I'm going to do is just go over to blending modes and go to lighten. That's going to give me a good idea of where this planet's going to be sat without that big dark border around it. So I can make some adjustments to exactly where my shadow is going to fall on this dark side of the planet. The next thing that I need to do is select this and get rid of all of that darkness around the back from the normal blender mode. So I'm just going to grab an elliptical marquee tool and grab all of this planet. Now, you don't have to be too precise, but getting it as close as possible before you make a mask will make things a little bit easier. Now that we've got that there, I can adjust this by unlinking our mask over here and then adjusting this mask down to the size of our planet. This can be a little bit fiddly, so I'm not going to get it exact while we're recording, but that looks just about good enough to me. So now when you zoom out, the dark side of that planet is going to be actually dark and not this red mist that's being created by the glare from the sun. So if I were to deselect that now, that looks pretty good, but there's one more trick that I've used on a couple of my images that I think is worth showing you guys. If you take an image of just the head of a lighting arm a little bit out of focus, it creates these big glares, which we can use to make our sun a little bit more lively. So I can bring this all the way up over here, maybe rotate it around just a little bit and essentially hide it behind our sun. So I'm going to again go to lighten, and that should bring all of those what look like coronal mass ejections or solar flares coming out of the sun. That brings it into our scene, which I think is really quite interesting. Now this is completely down to you, this is optional, but I like to play around with stuff like this just to get a little bit more colour into these dark backgrounds. Once you've got your lighting arm in here, you can again mask this, and we'll just manually colour out everything that we don't want that is covering our detail on the sun. So I'm just going to very roughly colour away this stuff. Make a couple more adjustments over here now that we've got a lighter background. You can see that that's just overlapping a little bit. And I'd say that's a pretty good image for a couple of minutes of editing. Obviously, the longer you spend on these things, the more extravagant you can go, but that is the basic principle of having the shadow away from the sun and adding a little bit more colour into the dark backgrounds. I've had a lot of fun shooting our marble orrery today. It's been really interesting to shoot these different types of marbles. Marbles, of course, are really interesting macro photography subjects in and of themselves, so if you've got some lying around at home, I recommend getting them out and exploring some of the interesting patterns that you find going on inside the glass. You can create some really great abstract shots just by experimenting with your lighting and getting up nice and close. When you give yourself the added challenge of trying to make them look like planets, then things get really interesting. The variation between each one of these marbles had me changing my composition and changing my lighting almost every single time I changed subject, which is not unusual, but you'd think a lot of marbles would have a similar technique to them. But that's not the case. I found that it was a really interesting challenge, changing between all of these different styles of marbles and getting some really interesting and varied shots. Being that this is the first time I've tried to create planets from marbles, I'm sure there are a lot more techniques to explore and interesting opportunities to get some cool images out of these marbles. If you've got any cool ideas for your own marbles, make sure to let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a like whilst you're down there. If you want to see more macro photography ideas, tips, tutorials and inspiration, make sure to subscribe, and there'll be lots more videos on their way very soon. For now though guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.